Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. Happy Vlogmas day 28. We are in the middle of palette week on my channel, so every single day for 7 days straight I am posting palette themed content, and today I am reflecting on the 21 best eyeshadow palettes that I tried in 2021. So all of my favorite palettes of last year I am reflecting on, and I realized I must have been really bad at counting last year because I actually only had 20, not 21. But I have pulled all 20 palettes that were favorites last year. That means they survived my mid-year declutter, so that's a good sign. But I will be reflecting on my favorites of last year today. So if you're interested, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I would love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's get into the video. Hi, I've been pre-filming all day and I feel like I'm about ready to take this makeup off, and I just feel like my face looks so dry, so I feel like I'm not gonna like my makeup in this video, but that's okay. That is okay. Okay, you guys, when I pulled these palettes out, many of them I was not surprised by. Some of them I was like, oh, I guess I'm a little bit surprised. I considered that a favorite. However, last year, especially towards the beginning of 2021, I was still kind of in like my color phase where I was having a lot of fun playing with color. And this year I have not played with color much at all. So maybe I'll just start with like the most colorful palettes in the bunch. So the first one being my Menagerie Pastel Puff palette. This is the first and only palette that I've ever tried from Menagerie, and I have to say, for a pastel palette, this is such a good palette. I definitely do want to purchase more palettes from Menagerie. All of their palette launches I'm super interested in. For some reason, I just am sometimes a little bit more hesitant to purchase from indie brands, and I think it's not even because I'm nervous to buy from an indie brand, because I'm not. It's just like usually shipping takes longer, obviously because they're a small business, and I'm just so impatient, which is truly not fair to the brand. So there are so many other beautiful palettes from Menagerie. I definitely want to purchase at least one more from Menagerie this year. If I am reaching for pastels, this is definitely going to be one of my go-to palettes. There's a great selection of pastels in here. They show up on the eyes really well for pastels. I do like to lay a white base down with them, but I also like that you get both a white and a black in here. And then I love this shade Snowball. It's such a beautiful sparkly blue shade. So do I consider this a favorite palette in my collection? No, because it's not a color story I'm reaching for that much. But I also don't even remember all the palettes that I purchased last year. And I still think this is a great palette. I was just a little bit surprised, and I think I just haven't played with color this year either. A palette I'm not surprised was a favorite of last year, because when I pulled this back out this year, I was loving this palette. And I love Kaleidos eyeshadow formula in general, but the Flower Punk palette was a favorite of mine last year. I love every shade in here. I would say like the mint shades make me the most nervous, or I struggle with the most, just because I don't always do mint eyeshadow looks, and here I am with kind of a minty eye look on today, and then I have like my mint pajama top on. But I absolutely love the pink shades as well as the grungy greens, and I had so much fun pulling this palette back out this year and playing around with it again. So this is definitely still, it's hard for me to say like it's still a favorite when I don't, this is not my everyday color story, but when I'm wanting to have fun with color, this is definitely a favorite palette of mine in my collection. And then another colorful palette that I included as a favorite was the Glamlight Ice Cream Dream palette. And if I want to play with color, definitely this would be a favorite. I do really enjoy the Glamlight formula. I think they have a phenomenal formula. Both the mattes as well as the foiled shades in this palette just perform so well. I love the foiled shades specifically in this palette, just because I am someone who, if I do a neutral look, I can go in with a foiled color over the lid and I'm comfortable with that. It's when I play around with colorful mattes that I get a little bit more nervous. But I also did a few times play with color this year and reached into this palette and really do enjoy this one. Very happy to have it in my collection. I obviously just am not reaching for color that frequently, so that hasn't gotten a ton of use from me this year. Those are like the most colorful. I have a couple other colorful-ish palettes, one of them being the Odenzai Norns palette. Odenzai makes one of my favorite eyeshadow formulas in general, whether it be indie or like at Sephora or Ulta. This is what the Norns palette looks like. I absolutely still love this palette. I love the row of like sparkly shimmer foiled shades at the bottom. The shade Pink Chameleon is a favorite inner corner shade in my entire collection. I think it's just such a fun shade because if you do like say a neutral brown or like a warm brown or a cool brown eyeshadow look and then you pop this into the inner corner, it adds just like a little bit of like a hint of pink to the look, and it's just so incredibly beautiful. I think that Oden's Eye just has such a good formula. It's so easy to work with. It's really punchy. If you like something more subtle, I probably wouldn't necessarily steer you towards Oden's Eye, but I just love the brand, love their formula in general. This is definitely still, all of my Oden's Eye palettes are favorites in my collection. Okay, let's do some like, oh yeah, like definitely duh favorites. The Nabla Side by Side. I feel like this has been in my collection longer than just last year, but I guess I brought this into my collection at the very beginning of 2021. This is still a favorite of mine. I included this in my 10 eyeshadow palettes I would immediately repurchase if I lost, and I just adore this palette. I love the mix of like warm and cool toned shades. Nabla always has a variety of different finishes and formulas within their palettes, which I find really fun. I love Nabla Cosmetics, and this continues to absolutely be a favorite palette in my collection. And then also I have the Artist Couture Supreme Bronze palette. I must have purchased Supreme Nudes in 2020, but that is a favorite palette of mine as well. I love the Artist Couture formula. I was a little bit let down by the Supreme Mauves this year. I didn't think the Supreme Mauves formula was quite as good as the bronze or the nudes, but I reached for this quite a bit in 2021, especially, I want to say this released around the summertime, and it was just the perfect punchy, bronzy, summery palette, and I just adore the formula. I adore the packaging. So good. Still a favorite of mine in my collection, although this one didn't get a ton of use from me this year, but I still love that palette. I should note I didn't do makeup as much this year as I have in years past, meaning I didn't get as much use out of my eyeshadow palette collection, and I brought in quite a few palettes to my collection this year that I was testing. I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do next year for my eyeshadow consumption. I gotta figure that out. Was also not surprised to see the Huda Wild Tiger palette. I believe I included this in palettes I would replace if I lost them. I love this duochrome shade. I love the Huda Obsessions palettes. There's definitely some misses in the bunch, but for the most part, I really enjoy the Huda Obsessions palettes. I like that they're just like little compact pocket palettes that have a very curated color story, and this one is pretty unique to my collection. I don't have some of these warmer shades. Like, I feel like the yellow and the orange and even this red, which I don't reach for very frequently, but I do feel like they're very unique to my collection, and I continue to love this one from Huda. Kind of same color story, the Sigma Quarter Rosa palette. I do remember last year loving this palette so much. I used this quite a bit last summer, and I will say I actually reached for the Sigma Enchanted palette more this year than I did the Coral Obsessions, but I will also state that the summertime was when I was wearing the least amount of makeup this year. Therefore, that's why I don't feel like this got as much love, because I remember being so excited to pull this out this summer, and then I just was not wearing makeup at all. So I'm excited to pull this out again next spring, summertime, because I actually do really enjoy the Sigma formula, and I do love this color story. I just did not get around to that one very frequently this year. Also not surprising at all, another Huda palette, the Huda Rose Quartz. The more I used this palette this year, the more I loved it. I love the Huda larger palettes. I also think Huda does a really nice job of including different tones and textures, so it's not just like a matte formula and a foiled formula. Like, you're truly getting such a good variety of shades. If you don't like pinky, purpley looks, this is definitely not going to be the palette for you. But I really like this because you can build your look up to be more sultry, but you also can get a really ethereal, very like minimal, beautiful look out of this palette. And I've had so much fun playing with this one, continued into 2022. So that one is also definitely still a favorite. Also, not surprising at all, the ColourPop Limoncello. This continues to be a favorite in my collection. One of the best ColourPop palettes I've ever tried. A palette that looks somewhat maybe boring to like the average eye, but using this I've done so many, like such a variety of different looks, and it's not just like a one-trick pony like you sometimes get with ColourPop palettes. I truly do feel like you have a good variety of looks that you can do with this palette. This is a palette I bring traveling with me, or have pretty much brought traveling with me anytime I have traveled since purchasing this. I love these 3 shades right here. I also really like touring, and then I love the mattes in here too. It's such a good palette. Love this one so much. Okay, a palette that may have been one of my most used of last year. I loved this so much. Was not surprised to see this in the list, but I barely reached for this year, again, because this is more of like my summertime palette, but it's the NARS Summer Solstice palette. And this is actually the palette that really started to get me into just like all NARS products. I also purchased a face palette around the same time, and now I'm just like into NARS. Like, I am into the brand. I get super excited about all of the releases, even though they're all typically limited edition, which like drives me a little bit bonkers. I still want to purchase all the NARS products. I really fell in love with the formula. I love the foiled, like there's a couple of like foiled shades that kind of remind me of the sparkly shades in the Natasha Denona Glam Face Palette. They're really thin, but they're so punchy on the eyes. They're just so beautiful. You only get 2 matte shades in this palette, but they're like the perfect warm brown matte shades for the summertime, and I just absolutely love this palette. Again, so excited to just do my makeup more next summer and reach back into this. Not that I have to reach for this only in the summer, but it's like my perfect summertime palette. I don't know, I have not yet like tallied up my most and least used palettes of the year. I'm not sure I've reached for this at all this year, but this I do really love, and I'm disappointed in myself that I have not really reached for this one this year, and I really enjoyed this last year. It's the ColourPop Wild Child palette. This I love because it's a little bit deeper than ColourPop palettes typically go. You can do such a beautiful, like sexy, sultry, warm brown eye look with this, and I really did love this palette. So I'm disappointed in myself that I haven't reached for this, and I want to pull this back out because it's just so beautiful. I feel like I could do a really beautiful, warm, sparkly, like intense look and then a red lip, and I would just love it for like, well, this video is going up after Christmas, but like holiday time. The Chocolate Martini palette, I barely reached for this year, but I loved this last year. This, again, Glam Light, such a great formula. I'm disappointed in myself that I have not reached for this one this much, because I just loved every look that I created with this palette last year. It could have been that I used this quite a bit towards the end of last year and then just like put it away and didn't grab it again this year, but I'm excited to pull this one back out now that it's like top of mind. And there's a couple of different like palette series that I want to do next year, and this is like for a palette series, this is like top of mind for me to start that series with. So I didn't use this one that much this year, but this definitely was a favorite of 2021. A couple other palettes that I barely reached for this year, but like these truly were favorites last year. So I have the Viseart Soleil palette, Soleil La Plague. Loved this summer 2021, and then again just didn't reach for it this summer. But this palette, this was me giving Viseart another chance, because I've tried like 3 or 4 palettes from Viseart in the past and just wasn't a fan, but I really liked this color story, so I purchased it and really fell in love with this palette, and it made me want to try more Viseart palettes. Now I have not purchased a Viseart palette since. Viseart tends to be more expensive, and I want to make sure it's a color story that's going to work well for me, but again, barely reached for this year. Really excited though to pull this back out again for next year, and do really love that you can do like Viseart shadows work really well because they're very buildable. You can get a more subtle look, which sometimes is a preference for, you know, your everyday average consumer. And I'm just thinking like work appropriate looks, like absolutely need to, I should just pull this palette out and start using it again like right now. Another summer palette that I loved last year that I barely reached for this year was the ColourPop Cabana Club, but I almost didn't purchase this and then ended up being so happy that I purchased this last year because it was just such a fun color story. Quality was top-notch ColourPop quality. Like sometimes ColourPop can be hit or miss. This was great quality, and I just adored the fun pops of color in this palette, and then barely reached for it, or didn't reach for it at all this year. I'm not 100% sure, but I do want to pull that back out because I do still really enjoy that palette. Again, all of these palettes survived my mid-year declutter, so it's not like I dislike any of these palettes. I just didn't do my makeup as much this year, and in turn didn't get a ton of use out of my collection. Not surprised to see this one in here either. It's the Aether Beauty Amartine quad. This is just such a solid little quad. Very like one trick pony, but you don't have to think about it. Like if you want to do a beautiful mauve purple look, grab this palette. This shimmer shade specifically is just so beautiful. It's more punchy than you might expect, and typically I don't like satin shades, but I do really enjoy the 2 satin shades in here. Like this was just such an easy eye look in a little quad, and I loved it. So I don't know that I reached for this one much this year. This is typically the time of year I would be reaching for this color story, so I need to pull it back out. And then speaking of mauve color stories, I was a little bit surprised to see the Vive Muse palette in my favorites. I think maybe I was reaching for this quite a bit at the end of the year, and so it was like top of mind. And while I think that the quality of this palette is good, it's not like top tier, top notch, and I feel like in order for me to purchase another Vive Cosmetics palette, the color story would really have to be speaking to me. So I didn't reach for this one too much. I think I reached for this in like January, February of this year, and then really haven't reached for this much at all. So do kind of want to pull this one back out, but I was a little bit surprised to see this in my favorites. And again, I can't remember everything that I purchased last year, so like looking through everything, maybe it really was like top 20, but I was surprised by that one. Was not surprised though by the Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nudes, just because I used this palette so much last year. This is another great palette for travel because you do get a like variety of shades in this very easy to travel with palette. I do have a pan in mine. I did not reach for this one as much this year as I did last year, and I think that's just because I was bringing a lot of new eyeshadow in and just struggling to cycle through my actual collection. But I still think this is a great palette in my collection, and I do really enjoy it and will travel with it next year in 2022-3. The Club Nebula palette by Kaleidos in collaboration with Angie. This is still a favorite absolutely in my collection. While this palette is outside of my comfort zone, I think it's such a fun color story to play around with, and I absolutely love the foiled shades in this palette. So very happy to still have this in my collection. Definitely still a favorite. Even more so a favorite this year, also in collaboration with Angie, is the Oden's Eye Hella palette. Oh my goodness, I love that palette so much. But the last palette to reflect on from 2021 favorites is the Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette. And I used this quite a bit last year and have not really reached for this one that much this year. Not because I don't like this palette, because I really do enjoy this palette. The bottom row is definitely not like my average everyday go-to, but you have this really beautiful row of neutral mattes and then these beautiful pops of shimmers. I'm disappointed in myself I haven't reached for this because I do love the formula, love the color story. Easy eye looks to create, easy neutral but like poppy eye looks can be created from this palette. So why am I not reaching for it more? Because I need to be better about cycling through my makeup collection. But those are my 20 favorite eyeshadow palettes from last year and my thoughts on them today. I would love to know, do you have any favorites that you discovered last year that are still favorites this year? Perhaps some of the ones I talked about. Would love to know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video, for supporting my channel, for continuing to support me. I appreciate it so much, and I will catch you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye.